When Jon Jones vacated the heavyweight title, it meant there wasn't a single male American UFC champion.
There's not a single American male champion in the UFC.
If you told a UFC fan this 15 or even 10 years ago, they would have thought you were crazy. After all, the US has had 73 total champions, whereas every other country in the world combined has just 57. But if you look at almost every division, it tells the same story, dominated by Americans up until recently when fighters from all corners of the world came and took over.
Yeah. We had all the champs.
We did at one point, but like
That's
we said,
crazy.
And whether it's due to low fighter pay, the expansion of the sport, and the emergence of new fighter regions, it's only going to get worse for American fighters. So this is the rise and fall of the American UFC champion. When the UFC was created in 1993, no one involved knew what to expect.
From the time I first got into martial arts when I was a little kid, there was always this thought like, what would happen if a karate guy fought a judo guy? What would happen if a boxer fought a wrestler? And everybody had an opinion. But until UFC 1 came around, no one really knew. It was just theoretical. I always maintain that since 93 to today, martial arts have evolved more over the last 30 years than they have over the last 30,000 years.
But after the early dominance of Royce Gracie and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it quickly became evident what fighting style would take over: wrestling.
If you had to pick like one thing that you're good at, like what's the most important thing? It seems to me to be wrestling. Because the wrestlers can just, if you get a real high-level wrestler, they just dictate what happens. They dictate where the fight takes place. I don't think there is, you have to know how to strike. You have to know the other things as well. But I feel like if you have a pyramid of shit that's important, I feel like at the bottom is wrestling.
The best fighters in the world were almost all huge, strong American wrestlers. Dan Severn, Mark Kerr, Randy Couture, and then Mark Coleman.
When Mark Coleman beat Dan Severn and just got him in that scarf hold and cranked on his neck, when people saw what Mark was doing to people, everybody got bigger. Everybody. That was when Vitor went up to like 240.
Oh,
remember?
yeah.
Remember that? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody got bigger because they were just thinking, one day I'm going to have to fight that fucking gorilla.
They had the cardio, the grappling, and the strength that was near impossible to match. And through the collegiate system, America was producing elite wrestlers that turned into top MMA fighters at an unrivaled rate. On paper, it's obvious why. America had a culture of encouraging young athletes into wrestling, incredible training facilities, and most importantly, a clear pathway to the top. And no one could match it.
back in a day when mixed martial arts was such in its infancy stage, you had guys like Matt Hughes, Tito Ortiz, Jon Jones, Daniel Cormier, guys who came up from wrestling. Wrestling was such a dominant sport that when you would fight people still their traditional stuff like, oh, I'm a kickboxer, or I'm a boxer, or I come from a striking background.
I'm a karate guy.
I'm a karate guy,
It was
right?
very different.
With the UFC being an American company, putting on events mostly in America with an American audience, they were of course looking for North American stars to put front and center. But it's not like there weren't talented fighters in other regions at that time. In the late 90s and early 2000s, both Pride FC and Pancrase had people who definitely could have been competitive with the top UFC guys. Whether it was Wanderlei Silva from Brazil, Igor Vovchanchin from Ukraine, a whole host of Japanese fighters and more, the talent pool of MMA fighters was already vast.
Back in those days, if you was Pride champion, you was number one. If you was UFC champion, you was number two. You remember that?
The problem was, the American audience and probably the UFC itself wasn't totally aware, and if they were, the UFC wasn't overly interested or capable of bringing them all across. This was of course a time before viral Twitter clips, the ability to live stream events, and before the world was as connected as it is now. At this point, the UFC was very much a North American company with aims of becoming global. Of the first 100 UFC events, 90 of them were held in America, whereas outside of those dull Apex cards, it feels like the UFC is in a different country every other week. And that's why almost every UFC division at the time was dominated by US fighters. Outside of Bas Rutten, the heavyweight title took 8 years and 10 different title reigns to be won by a non-American. It's the same story at 205 also. Apart from Vitor Belfort, it took 12 years and 10 different title reigns until Lyoto Machida and Shogun Rua shook things up. And essentially every single UFC division follows this path. There's the odd outsider or two from another nation, usually Brazil, but every other champion is American.
It was you, Dominic.
Yep.
145 was
Aldo.
55
was Max?
No, not Max. it was Frankie Edgar.
Yep.
70 was like Robbie Lawler or Tyron Woodley.
Yep.
And then it was like
185 was either
Weidman, Luke
yep.
after Anderson.
Yep.
Then it was me and John. And then heavyweight was Steve Barricade. It was all Americans.
All Americans. Now,
How many American champions do we have?
0.
We have 0 champs.
0 champions.
Stop lying.
As of this, yeah.
Kayla Harrison.
Oh, my bad.
Oh.
Aside from the UFC being an American-centric brand, there's so many other reasons for this. A major one is the fact that the talent snowballs. If the first champions are American, then those who come after them not only have a path to follow, but their experience to learn from. And that's exactly what happened with the next generation, guys like Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, and Matt Hughes. They learned from those who came before them, and that talent gap actually increased between America and the rest of the world. By 2010, the UFC had seen 48 title reigns. Of those, 40 were by North Americans, 6 by Brazilians, and just 2 champions were outside of that. That's 83% of champions being North American. But over the next decade, that number fell to 58%, and in the past 5 years, it's just 29%. So it's safe to say the Americas once had an absolute monopoly on the UFC. Nowadays, though, it's a completely different story, and the once dominant force is now the minority.
You look at the top 15 pound for pound on the UFC's website right now.
Yeah.
Taporia, no. Islam, no. Marab, no. Dricus, no. Pantoja, no. Volkanovski, no. Magomed, no. JDM, no. Tom, no. Pereira, no. Max, 11. So there's no one in the top 10. Bilal, technically yes. Although not, I don't know what he...
Yeah.
Anyway, Armin, Khamzat. So there's 2.
So just what happened? The major reason is the globalization of both the UFC and MMA as a whole. Whether it was UFC Fight Pass in 2013 giving global access, events starting to pop up across the globe, or stars emerging from different regions, the UFC was reaching its full potential as a company. They were partnering with M1 Global to scout Russian talent, building performance institutes in Mexico and China, or having Ultimate Fighter seasons exclusive to foreign talent. It was clear the UFC was spreading itself to be what it is today, a global powerhouse.
What I want in Mexico is I want to take kids off the street. I want kids that are in the streets and have nothing to look forward to come into the PI and learn how to train, learn how to do jiu-jitsu, learn how to do Muay Thai, and learn lots of other skills there. And not all these kids are going to grow up and become fighters, but they'll become coaches or they'll touch the sport in some way, shape, or form. That's what the PI is going to be for.
And over the years, stars were emerging from countries not known for their UFC talent. Conor McGregor in Ireland, Khabib in Russia, Adesanya in New Zealand, and again the list is extensive. Fighters like that have helped drive the rise of MMA as a sport in their countries too. Much like how the second generation of American fighters followed in the footsteps of those before them. Those from the likes of Russia, Georgia, New Zealand, and so many others have a clear pathway. Now you see City Kickboxing in Auckland producing numerous UFC fighters, or Khabib being the inspiration and role model for the countless Dagestan fighters taking over the sport.
Today, the reach of MMA is massive, and with what the boys at my gym have done, which is like really put it on the world stage and put it on the mainstream, like it's crazy nowadays. Like everybody in this country knows what those boys at my gym have achieved on the international stage, and everybody knows who they are. That was unfathomable when I started the sport. Yeah. We had fighters that were at the level that they are, and no one knew who they were.
Iron sharpens iron, and thanks to the emergence of the sport globally, every region now has elite level talent to train with, learn from, and guide them throughout their careers. But another key reason why the American influence has declined over the years is arguably the most essential: money. Despite the UFC growing to a multi-billion-dollar business, the fighter payout across the board still isn't great. We all know the stats. The UFC pays around 10 to 15% of its revenue to fighters, while the likes of the NFL, NBA, and MLB are 50% or above.
That's where the problem is for me with Dana White, is him now making billions of dollars off of the organization and only paying his fighters 15% of the stake. Whereas in the NFL and NBA, they get paid 50% of the total revenue of the team.
Even the bottom tier NBA players are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, while their UFC counterparts make $10,000 and get released. What that means is that elite athletes in North America who are serious about their futures are way more likely to pick a Big Four sport or something else entirely over MMA, whereas in many other countries, those domestic opportunities aren't there, and particularly those countries with lower GDPs and lower costs of living, accepting a 10K to show, 10K to win contract with a chance of a bonus is still a huge amount of money.
The average house in Brazil to buy is like $200,000, like maybe even less. I mean, that's like a nice house. A nice house, an average house in America is 4 or 5. I'm like, no, because they can afford it. They sign these Brazilians, these daggies, what the fuck you want to call them. They go home with their 20K and they're living life good. They're living life good.
But while all these reasons are outside of the cage, a big reason behind the American decline is what's happening in the octagon too. For a long time in the UFC, NCAA wrestlers ran riot. Very few could handle their grappling prowess, and there was a clear skill gap between them versus the rest of the world. But recently that's completely changed.
We're seeing a lot of these American wrestlers run into just athletic people from somewhere else, and they're stopping it. Yep. They really are stopping it. You know, I mean, it kind of got to the point where if you're not from the Caucasus, I don't want to hear about your wrestling credentials. You know? It really did.
Well,
it kind of has.
Now, the Dagestan wrestlers and others have filled that spot, because in truth, they've always been arguably the best in the world, we just didn't know.
How crazy has it been watching all these dudes from Dagestan invade MMA
I knew it.
and dominate?
I knew it. Because in wrestling, they've been around. So I was like, when I was about to start fighting and when I started fighting, I said, man, when these Russian dudes from these regions start to come, it's going to be a problem. Because you know how good they were as wrestlers, right? What's going to happen when these guys come into fighting?
In the UFC's earlier days, fighters outside of North America just didn't have the knowledge to deal with wrestling. Take English fighters for example. They've always had good striking, but grappling has been their Achilles heel. Nowadays though, the top fighters like Tom Aspinall, Michael Venom Page, and others are able to deal with it far better than their predecessors. And welterweight is the perfect example of this. Some of the champions were Matt Hughes, GSP, Johnny Hendricks, Tyron Woodley, all North Americans with incredible wrestling pedigrees. In fact, it took 21 years and 11 different champions until Kamaru Usman became the first person outside of North America to win the 170-pound title, and even then, Usman came through the American collegiate wrestling path. Since then, the only American to reclaim the belt has been Bilal Muhammad, while England's Leon Edwards and Australia's Jack Della Maddalena have held it, both from countries not known for their wrestlers, but they had to beat grapplers to reach the top.
Brother, I follow all wrestling, you know, all wrestling competition, like I saw all world championship, Olympic games, like international tournament. I don't see some people from Australia there. Sorry, but this is true.
It's truly a new era of MMA, and spoiler alert, it's going to get even more bleak for American fighters. Ironically, the US fighters were the ones who helped drive the UFC to its global success, but in doing so, they actually signed their own demise as these new regions came in and surpassed them.
Like Henry Cejudo, Triple C, Olympic gold medalist, flyweight champion, bantamweight champion. When he fights Merab, I didn't think Merab was going to out-wrestle him, but it's mixed martial arts. They're able to put it together where the guys like, you know, Georgian wrestling, you know, Dagestan wrestling, they've been doing it since they're 5, 6 years old when I started wrestling in high school.
They helped make the UFC become the gold standard, the place every fighter wants to compete, and now that it's happened, they've been pushed out of the very top. And moving forward, the snowball is only going to continue leveling the playing field across the world. Fast forward another 10 years and who knows, we might be talking about there being no Americans in the top 5 of the divisions. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, go hit subscribe. We make new videos just like this every single week.